Hi everyone, and welcome back again. Kim Pointer and myself, Rivka Hagan. We are absolutely delighted to have you along for a run through some case studies with our special guest, Jo Millard. Jo Millard is highly experienced in both performing her nursing duties as a very experienced nurse in primary care, but specifically in case conferencing, which is of course what we're talking about here. Jo, welcome. Can you give us a little bit of a background on who you are, where you're from, and your various roles and experiences?
Yeah, thanks very much, Rivka and Kim. It's lovely to be here with you and sharing information about case conferencing. So I'm a registered nurse with extensive experience in both, acute sector and across all health sectors, but particularly in the last 15 or so years in primary health. Well, it's probably closer to 20 years in primary healthcare, and working as a project officer in primary healthcare as well. So have extensive experience across that, and also have done work in other sectors where care coordination has been really important and emphasised. So I feel as though when we're talking about case conferencing, we're talking about care coordination to a large degree as well.
Yeah, we've certainly mentioned those two terms together frequently in the main body of the instructional webinar that is part of this series of resources. Kim, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Riff, and welcome, Jo. So, Jo, we've had an off-screen discussion about a couple of case studies that you thought would be really important for us to go through in terms of workflow, and also why did you choose those particular clients? So over to you.
Yeah, look, thanks, Kim. So I guess the two standout case scenarios for me was a male patient with mental health and alcohol and drug issues over a long period of time, lots of complex underlying factors in there as well. So it wasn't just woke up one day with these issues. It was, chronic disease occurring that probably led to mental health condition occurring, and then due to the stress of that, alcohol and drug sort of overlying all of that. And that person was sort of like early 60s, had, the family tried to help, but, the person became over time harder and harder to communicate with in an acceptable manner. So that was quite complex. The other case that I'm thinking of is a younger person who was a sports, really into sports and very athletic, and had a sports injury, and that led to anxiety and depression. So not as chronic a situation, but certainly, the family contacted us, and they actually raised the alarm there and said, look, we're really worried this person's withdrawing, and we have concerns. And so there was a follow-up call to that person just to check out, because perception between patient and family there's all sorts of complexities that go on there. So just a routine check-in. We hadn't had contact with that person for some time, so looked into how they perceived they were doing, and they felt that they were struggling. So it was a timely call. And the gentleman that I mentioned with both mental health and alcohol and drug issues, that came to our attention because that person, we were having phone calls from the police saying, help, we can't keep responding. We also were aware that Lifeline was having, multiple calls there. They were, they're always busy, and they were being overwhelmed by perhaps not beneficial outcomes, the contact there. And that person was also, known locally and seen, being unwell and falling over and that kind of thing. So, and would sometimes just present, the gentleman would just present. So with unplanned visits. So, yeah.
So one of the key topics I'm hearing there is that the community flagged your patient one, and patient two was the family. The family said, look, we need some help here. And then you step through the process of getting consent and seeking to understand further detail there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
So when we were looking at the workflow there, it came to my attention on both occasions. And so so then we need to talk to our internal team about what's going on, what can we offer here, and what are the best way forward. And for both, it was decided that case conferencing would be useful. So there was a lot of, I'm sure you've covered off on a lot of these things, there was a lot of internal communication. Fortunately, we were reviewing our policy and procedure around case conferencing at the time, so it was pretty clear and everyone was pretty much across what was happening there. So there was a lot of communication, and we were looking at, who would need to be present, who we would need to contact, who were the key players in this. Like for particularly that first gentleman, we could have had 10, 12 people in the room. As it was, there were quite a few by the time family and support people came. And police were there, and we had alcohol and drug people there, and other, specialist support also on board as well. So there were a number of people either virtually or physically present for that in arranging it. So it actually took a lot of scheduling, and I think it's really important that, we're comfortable with all of that, that we communicate clearly with the patient about what we're looking at, why we're looking at doing this, how it could be beneficial, what it might feel like for them being in the room at the time, and coordinating all of that. And if you've got, the more people you have involved in the case conferencing, the more effort, energy and time it actually takes to coordinate all of that. And that's not to say that that's not worthwhile, but it just does take significant planning. You really need your checklists out to help with all of that. So I think having a GP that's familiar and having that team approach is really important for the patient and for good outcomes as well. So, and I think for both of them, it was really important to have those really good processes. So some of the workflow issues that I'm thinking of were around the setting up and actually having communicating with our admin team, so that the admin team were across it. So we didn't have someone walking in and saying, who are you? That person felt welcome, they were addressed. We knew why they were there within, the confidentiality and needs to know sort of basis. And we were also, we had to make sure we had a room that was suitable, that privacy and confidentiality was premium, that, we could get the virtual equipment set up, so those hard and human resources set up, and that, we can actually connect. Now, we all know that virtual things, can go well or not so well depending on the day. So all of those things were being taken into account as far as workplace workflow goes.
So, Jo, can I just interject and ask? That sounds like a pretty complex setup with, many more than the minimum requirement for, for care providers and participants in the case conference. Had you had prior experience with running case conferences that gave you the confidence to sort of run the bigger, more complex case conference?
I think the thing, honestly, I came into that first complex case conference, I did research, did my homework, looked into the MBS requirements, the guidelines. There are quite often state guidelines around it and, advice. So that kind of do my homework, make sure that I'm across it. But I think that the need was really clearly identified by the patients, by the community or relatives and family. And so then it was just, who is best placed to do this? Does the GP have time to do this? No. Who can we get on board? And then it was really, just being organised and planning, making sure that everybody that needed to be there and, that people had a needs to know for confidentiality reasons, but that things were set up, so that the patient was the most comfortable and felt that they were involved. We were looking at, their care plan. that was there, and whether, what were their goals in all of this, because ultimately that is key, is that the patients actually across what's going on and that we're meeting their wellbeing requirements.
In terms of outcomes, what kind of outcomes did you derive from both of these case conferences?
So from the person, the second person that I mentioned, the second scenario where the person had anxiety and depression, that was fairly easily resolved, in a sense that the person was set up to have follow-up appointments, regular review by external providers such as psychologists. We also had the exercise physiologist present. And so that was, the person had regular review. They actually improved, felt more confident as they were able to exercise and feel fitter and stronger again. They felt their quality of life improved, and it made a real difference. That didn't happen in a week, but it did happen slowly over time, but it was observable change. But the first person, we all hope, if case conferencing was easy, everyone would be doing it, and we're encouraging you to give it a go. But some of the really good things to come out of it, the person did improve, but there was always going to be limitations on that improvement. But what was really good was that our team built a cohesive response to case conferencing. We had documented pathways for that. Everyone was clear on their role and responsibility around it. So some of the really good outcomes that maybe were unplanned or unintended were that the family's understanding of the patient and their illness and what they needed to be supportive rather than what they assumed to be supportive. So that improved communication. I think all through this, dealing with everyone, communication is key. So it was also, there was improved cross-sector communication and understanding. So in that more complex scenario, we understood what the police could do. They understood better what we could do. We had clearer expectations were outlined. There wasn't any assumptions, even with that patient, being able to access the clinic and that case conference, everyone assumed they could get there, but actually there were problems with, them actually, they didn't live far away, but getting there, and everyone might have assumed that everyone else was organising that, but, having really good coordination, that was averted, and, we actually had fairly smooth running all the way through. So I think that, that internal team appreciation and understanding was really important, and the external stakeholders, allied health, better communication and rapport and ongoing relationship with them.
Well done. Look, what great outcomes. It's just marvellous after all that effort that you've put in to get the team together, that you really did find that especially the communication is so enhanced. And that is really, so much of what Kim and I have been talking about in the main section as well, in the main recording that we've put together, that until you actually dip your toe in the water and go through some of those hard bits, that it's hard to taste what the benefits and the outcomes can be, and they can be just so very surprising, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely, Rivka. I think that case conferencing is not necessarily the answer to everything, but it's a very necessary process for us to support our patients in the best way that we can, and to really set them up for success. For them to be able to take their pathway and decide their own steps, but actually for us to be there supporting them.
Can I ask too, in terms of the experience with these sort of two reasonably complex cases that we've been chatting about, has that set you and your team up for better rollout or more successful rollout of other case conferences? Has that given you that sort of confidence to say, well, we've done it now in this scenario, what does that mean going forward? And would you be looking to sort of introduce it as more of a business as usual type of service, to be embed it into your services rather than an ad hoc process of just sort of very particular patients that kind of come up every now and again? How do you see that?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important. I think that the whole team felt that they could do case conferencing and provide it much more easily after the first couple of times that we undertook that. We had clear processes. Nothing was quite as complex again. We could see the benefits and it was really, we could see how important it was to patient wellbeing. So I think that it's, could be initially daunting, but don't let it put you off doing it. I think it's really important that we are optimising our patient care, and this is one way for the people that we identify and have that need. Certainly in identifying the patients and how do we do that, like hopefully our recall and reminders do that, but sometimes it'll be opportunistic. Sometimes that person won't be on our radar. So it might be the community, it might be a family member, and I think it's really important that we really embrace that communication coming to us from wherever it is. So it might be that we see that this person's scheduled, for review and they're not doing so well and we decide it and it's a planned approach. But it also could be someone raising, the alarm that there's bells ringing here, and that we actually, then communicate with the patient, seek their consent and explanation of the process, and then involve the key players in those case conferences.
Great tips. And Jo, I was just from your perspective of being a care coordinator, did you facilitate the case conference given the work and obviously you going and researching and making sure all your compliance components were in place so you had a solid preparation? Did you then step into that role of facilitating the discussion, or was it the GP, or who was those key people?
Yeah, in those instances, I actually facilitated the setup. The GP in the first instance was familiar to the patient, but had not done case conferencing before. So we kind of talked it through and kind of rehearsed it ahead of time with, no patient there, and worked out what we would be doing and made sure that all the information that everyone needed was to hand, and that we weren't saying, oh, we don't have that result available or whatever it might be. In that instance, we had everything we needed to have, and, then, continued to facilitate it. And I was responsible for taking the notes. Like the GP, of course, was taking notes, but it's hard for your patient isn't there with you. We need to be monitoring them, checking in with them to see that they're okay. So I was taking notes so that we could check in, and sometimes we needed in that first scenario to stop and just offer that person a bit of a break. Taking notes and recording. The GP did their own notes, but, sometimes, it's handy to have an actual story as it unfolded, just to make sure that we can compare and contrast and that we haven't missed anything for follow-up. That's really important, following the case conference, that the activities that have been determined by whoever needs to undertake them actually happen as well. We have a record and an agreement around that going forward.
So to remediate challenges that, say, a practice nurse might come up against, what's some tips and tricks? And you sounded like preparation's key, considering the human that's in the room and making sure that you're going at a pace that's, going to be appropriate for them to glean the information, understanding the compliance components, having a team-based approach. Anything else that you would say is really critical to ensure that they have a successful case conference if they wish to undertake it?
I think the human component can be easily overlooked. The patient's there and they're our key person there. So the case conference, of course, we're talking about business cases and funding and all of those kind of things, but the patient is the key person there. If we're not making a positive impact to that person, we don't want to traumatise them. We want them to feel included. We want them to be listened to. It's about doing with, not doing to, those kind of things. That person-centered care approach. And as I mentioned, so it might be that, that one instance we stopped, had a glass of water, we checked in, does the patient have any questions? Because it can be overwhelming hearing different people talking about you. being aware of what's being said and maybe stopping and saying, can you put that another way? Did you understand that? Checking the understanding of the patient. And sometimes we can be using, clinical terms and acronyms, which, depending on the patient's health literacy, can be completely, beyond their understanding, beyond our understanding sometimes as health professionals, depending on if it's a specialty person that's talking about whatever the health issue is. So, yeah, I think that communication and just care and kindness, looking out for that person,
And I also heard solid systems and processes. So, compassion.
Absolutely. Planning, communication, just so essential. If admin is not aware of the person coming or they haven't set up the virtual telehealth, all of that makes for discomfort, unease, a rocky start, and that can all be avoided with good planning. So I'd rather take an extra week to set it up and have it all go smoothly than, be rushing things and, also assuming that the staff that you told about this, are not furloughed at the moment, is also important. Another thing that's just come to my mind too is at the moment with COVID-19 is ensuring that everyone is safe. So, that infection prevention and control, we may not have had to have thought about that and incorporated that into our case conferencing a while back, but certainly we need to be thinking about, some things you can do outside, case conferencing, probably not for privacy and confidentiality reasons, but we need to provide safe care for everyone concerned.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so much for all those great insights and bringing those two case studies to life for us. There is many ways that we can adapt and adopt case conferencing. There's no doubt about it. And I really appreciated the fact that, you gave that care coordination plug again, and the importance of having someone who's coordinating all those pieces of the puzzles to make it a very effective process, and always thinking about that human that we're discussing, right? Because that's critical with the advocate, with a voice, and coordinating all those key pieces. Ruth, any parting words from you?
Look, I guess for me, the real takeaway that's just hit home so strongly is also just the consideration of what does the case conference look like if you just have a team of health professionals around the table, and the way that that's communicated is going to look very different to what you need to do when the patient plus or minus their extended family or other participants is present. I think you really articulated that just beautifully, to think so carefully about what you're saying and how you communicate that, because it's an entirely different remit depending on whether the patient is present or not. And I think that's just a really worthwhile take home for me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's so important, Rivka. Sometimes we can shortcut the way we talk and we can clinicalise or medicalise the way we're talking, but it's really important that we are plain speaking, it's plain language, and it's kind language
Yes.
In the way we're communicating with the patient and family present.
Well, Jo Millard, from my heart, thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights and your wisdom with Rivka and I. We really appreciate the time, effort and insights to, the tips and tricks that's going to make for a very effective case conference. And to all our fellow nurses out there, we wish you all the best with your case conferencing in the future.
Yeah, best wishes, everyone.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Kim.